Okay, so this is Miss Hoover reporting to you live today from my screened-in porch, trying to hide from my children again. So we've talked about evolution, how it's a change over time that happens because of survival of the fittest. But what actually changes? So the first change we're going to talk about is structural change. So structures change over time. Like if you look at fossils of some of the first human-like things or our ancestors, they have even different shaped faces and different shaped heads, and they're kind of hunched over and shorter. So actual structural physical shape structure changes over time. Some examples of that are how things develop specialized structures. Like bats have these really cool wings that are really lightweight and they have this stretchy material that allow them to fly. Or the fact that over time, polar bears develop to have these really thick soles of their feet that keep them warm and protect them from the sharp ice that they walk on. Again, it's not that one polar bear decided I need tougher feet. It's that over generation after generation, the polar bears that were born with thicker soles of their feet, just by some mutation or some shuffling of genes, they were better adapted, they fit better, and so they survived better, they reproduced, and they passed on those thick sole of the feet genes. We have some evidence of this. There's actually some animals have structures that they don't even need that are still around in their bodies. And that's kind of evidence of evolution for us that we're like, wow, this must have descended from something else because it has this structure in it that it doesn't even need. So some snakes have non-functional leg bones, kind of indicating that they probably evolved from something with legs. There's also whales with pelvic bones right here, and you can see whales don't they have no pelvis, but they have these weird pelvic bones. That means they probably evolved with from something that had a pelvis. Another piece of evidence for evolution with structures is that some humans are born with a tail. So that kind of shows that maybe we evolved from something with a tail. And the reason it happens is we have a gene for apoptosis that actually tells cells to die. So when you're a little embryo fetus, you do kind of have a little tail. This is what you kind of look like at first. But the tail does eventually, it's actually programmed to die. You also have webbed fingers, and the webbing in between your fingers is programmed to die. There's a gene that tells those cells in between your fingers go and die, so this person isn't born with webbed fingers. So it's a failure of that gene to work or to be present or to be turned on. And just more evidence that of evolution that we're all related to some common ancestor. So besides actually physically changing your shape and your structure, you can also have functional changes. So the venom inside a snake isn't necessarily like a structure, but it's like a kind of a chemical functional change. So some snakes have poisonous venom. Again, it's not that one snake decided I better grow some poisonous venom that would really help to protect me. It's that, over time, some snakes were born either by genetic shuffling, mixing of genes, or a mutation that brought in a new gene. Some snakes were born with this poisonous venom, and it happened to work out really well. Those snakes survived because they could poison their enemies, and then they went on to survive and reproduce and pass on that poisonous venom gene. Same thing with skunks. They probably one animal one day had this smelly stuff that came out of them, and maybe everybody laughed at that animal. It was a genetic mutation or something, and then it turned out to be really useful. Skunks are able to protect themselves, and those skunks that could spray a stinky spray at their enemies were able to protect themselves and survive and reproduce and then pass on those genes, and you end up with this animal that can spray a stinky spray. So those are examples of functional changes, so not just actual structural changes, but function and biochemistry changing over time and being passed on to the next generation. And then the third thing that can change over time, it can evolve, go through evolution, is also behavior. So like an animal like walruses that fight over females, they smack each other with their tusks, and they can fight to the death for a female. Same thing with rams that they look like goats with the big, they're like male goats with the big antlers, or whatever they're called. They will smash together and try to push each other off a cliff. So that's sometimes to the death for a female. Why are those males so darn aggressive? Well, maybe they didn't all used to be, but over time, the ones that were the most aggressive, they get the female, and then they reproduce and they pass on their super aggressive genes. And now the next generation of rams is really aggressive, and the most aggressive ram is going to win, or the most aggressive walrus is going to win and pass on his aggressive genes. So even behavior can evolve over time and be passed down. Because if that behavior helps increase reproductive success. There's also fireflies that mate at certain times of day based on the rate of blinking. So again, somehow, like maybe there were different fireflies and there was too much competition, different rates of blinking gave off different messages. Whatever happened with the rates of blinking, it made certain fireflies more successful. So then they were able to survive and they were able to reproduce and pass on their genes. So even behavior can evolve over time. So again, we have evolution is change over time due to some surviving better than others. We have structural changes, behavioral changes, and functional changes. And none of that would be possible if we didn't have diversity and variation. If you didn't have one walrus that was more aggressive than the other walrus, then their behavior, you wouldn't have survival of the fittest. You wouldn't have the more aggressive one survive and reproduce, and you wouldn't end up with that change evolution over time. So you got to have that diversity and variation for this all to happen. And again, those come from like genetic shuffling that occurs with sexual reproduction, bringing together two different things with different genes, and also from mutation, just bringing about maybe a brand new gene.